Hello again, everybody. Michael Matt down in the catacombs with a brief catacomb rant. It's about feminism. Isn't feminism the biggest fraud in the world? You know, with the prospective first woman president elevating pulses night after night over at CNN, and doesn't it seem strange that so little attention was paid to the high-profile woman of the 2016 campaign cycle who actually did shatter a glass ceiling, a pretty important one? I'm referring to Donald Trump's winsome campaign manager, Kellyanne Conway, who's the first woman to hold this important position in any major presidential campaign. Okay, so maybe it was an oversight with the talking heads over on the left. Maybe they just didn't notice. That can happen to anyone. But even after Team Trump pulled off the most stunning political victory maybe in American history, with an astonishing victory that, practically speaking, no pundit, expert, pollster, talking head, none of them saw it coming, our liberal friends in the mainstream media still fail to hail the woman who managed to pull off the most impressive upset in presidential campaign history. It's not as if Mrs. Conway got, to where she is by accident, some sort of anomaly. She's an Oxford-educated Phi Beta Kappa who earned a law degree with honors from George Washington University, the Law Center. She's a founder and president of the Polling Company, Inc., which is a very successful polling company, a corporation with offices in New York and Washington, D.C., which for a quarter of a century has been bringing home some really very significant victories. Got people like Mike Pence elected, a lot of high-profile politicians down through the years, and tracking the trends that help pro-life politicians win against incredible media bias throughout the country, and again, for years and years. So she's talented, she's sought after, she's highly successful, she's powerful, and she's a woman. Granted, she's not a lesbian, but nevertheless, shouldn't Kellyanne Conway be the pinup girl for feminists everywhere, especially those talking heads howling and growling about the glass ceiling for women in American politics? But as you know, there's a couple of little problems that come to mind with someone like Mrs. Conway.
Morning at the Conways.
Sweetheart, how's this? And then which jacket?
Scrambling to get the kids ready for school. Familiar chaos for any parent, though Kellyanne Conway is not any parent.
For Kellyanne Conway, bluntly acknowledging the uphill climb.
The mother of 4 young children is Donald Trump's campaign manager. These days, her mother, who moved in to help, makes the pancakes. Conway's only been on the job since August, Trump's 3rd campaign manager, but the first woman ever to run a GOP presidential race. She was raised in New Jersey by a single mom, aunts, and grandmother, all women. As a political pollster, she chose to work in what she calls a man's world. Still, like most working moms, time with her kids is precious.
Mrs. Conway is Mrs. Conway. Her maiden name is Fitzpatrick. That's right, no hyphenated name for her. She's happily married to a man, no less, which makes her, conservative and controversial in some circles in this country. But most disqualifying of all is Mrs. Conway's pro-life position. She's a champion of the unborn.
Some of the first things he has done as President of the United States has been to gut many of the strides that what has become a center-right country, believing mainly in pro-life issues, fought so hard to achieve. Very few people, about 9% of Americans, agree with the Bill Clinton, Hillary Clinton, Barack Obama view on abortion, which is basically abortion anyone, anytime, anywhere. They voted against partial birth abortion bans. When Barack Obama was in the Chicago State Senate, he famously opposed the Born Alive Infant Act, which of course would have allowed medical care to be administered to survivors of botched abortions instead of letting them, quote, expire. And looking back in the campaign, I think one of the fundamental mistakes that those who were in charge of the Republican Party and the McCain campaign made is in not making more of a household name and an issue of Jill Stanek, for example, the nurse who did administer to one of these survived abortion victims in Illinois, because rather than trying to talk about Bill Ayers, talk about Jill Stanek.
This Irish, Italian-American mother of 4 children is, according to the National Right to Life, quote, someone who has labored in the trenches for decades on behalf of unborn babies, end quote. A National Right to Life news article, in fact, by Dave Adrisco, quotes David N. Olstein, Ph.D., who's the executive director of the National Right to Life, on Conway, saying the following, quote, Kellyanne is very, very smart and without question more knowledgeable about public opinion on abortion than any other pollster. She will provide Trump with savvy insight and advice as he runs against the most pro-abortion presidential candidate ever in Hillary Clinton and a media establishment that is determined to elect her. In choosing pro-life Kellyanne Conway as his campaign manager, Donald Trump has not only availed himself of one of the most talented advisors possible, he has also sent a strong signal to the entire pro-life movement about his own commitment to the pro-life issue, end quote. That's quite a vote of confidence for Kellyanne Conway, who now, of course, is a highly placed advisor to President-elect Trump. And we'll be hearing a lot more from her over the next 4 years. But with pro-life cred like that, Kellyanne Conway could become the first woman president of the United States, and the folks over at CNN would still give the story below the fold coverage. Why? Because Mrs. Conway is not the right kind of woman. Down through the ages, the world has seen plenty of great monarchs and heads of state who were strong and successful women, but who, like Mrs. Conway, didn't go in for murdering babies and burning bras. So the course of action is clear when it comes to women in politics or in media and so forth. They don't count when they're Christian, especially when they're Catholic, when they're pro-life. First and foremost, feminism has never been about empowering women. The underlying point and purpose of the movement was to wage war on traditional gender roles first, and then finally on gender itself. Feminism is fundamentally anti-family, which is why we hear no hue and cry from the feminists, from Gloria Steinem and Jane Fonda and all the rest, when homosexual men began adopting children and telling the world that women and mothers are utterly irrelevant when it comes to the successful raising of children. The most anti-feminist position in the world, and yet no one seems to be bothered by it in the least. We'll just make experiments out of these children. So in a world at war with real women, it must be said that Mrs. Conway is a charming threat to the entire feminist enterprise. Donald Trump's pro-life and proud practicing Catholic advisor gives hope for this new administration to many Americans, at least those of us who are not out smashing police cars and shutting down freeways and trying to show the world just how willing the left is to accept the outcomes of presidential elections in this country. That'll do it for the Catacomb Rant. Ladies and gentlemen, Michael, Matt, down in the Catacombs, and we will see you next week.